Welcome to Three Questions Over Coffee with the Art Farm at Serenbe. Our guest today is Dr. Phill Tabb. He's Serenbe's master planner, an architect, a nice guy, and his work is currently in Gainey Hall. Purchase a print in our art shop starting at $45 and support Phill and the Art Farm. Okay, here we go. So let's start. Question one.
Right.
Tell us about Corvus, the artwork that starts out your show in Gainey Hall.
Be happy to, Megan. Corvus is a drawing that I began in 2005 in Castiglione Fiorentino, Italy. And it was my first semester teaching abroad. And before that, I had done some watercolors and small sketches, what I call in situ sketches or field studies. And I'd never really done anything that was a more serious drawing. And at the time, an artist from the University of Texas, Michael Mogdavera, was also teaching there and gave me a few pointers and sort of encouraged me to do this drawing. So I thought of Corvus, which the raven was kind of one of my favorite animals because he's so interesting and has been depicted throughout history. And so I started doing research on Corvus to find out that he has a wonderful kind of beginning. And as I did more research on him, I found out that there was a whole series of myths about Corvus that occurred over time. So in this drawing, I tried to create a medley of these various myths so they kind of bleed in from one to the other. And today I did a little research on one of the myths, which might be interesting to the audience. And that's the myth around Coronis. And I was looking at the relationship between Coronis, who was the mortal wife of Apollo, and Apollo had Corvus the raven as his favored animal. So one day, Apollo was flying across the sky as he does every day and asked Corvus to look after his wife to make sure she was faithful. And after about 3 days or so, he reappeared to find out that Coronis had had an affair with another mortal, a guy by the name of, I'll have to go over here, Ischys. So Apollo was really mad, and he decided to tell his sister Artemis. Artemis came down and essentially fried Coronis and burnt her to a crisp, as well as burning Corvus, but Corvus didn't die, and his silver wings turned to black, which is why crows are black, apparently. And right before Coronis died, Apollo and her baby were pulled out. And this was known as the first cesarean birth. And the young baby, the boy, was Eclipsis. And he became the father of medicine.
Wow.
So anyway, there's a interesting kind of circle of ideas. And I looked up Corona. Of course, Corona is a little bit different than Coronis. And Corona means crown or halo. But there is a relationship between the two, and sometimes they're interchangeable. So I thought it was kind of interesting to kind of combine those two today.
I like that. Yeah, well, it feels very right now. So
Definitely.
Yeah, well, thank you for describing that piece. I'm excited to show our viewers what that looks like. So number two, you've been an architect and educator for over 45 years. That's kind of the rough math I did in my head. Is that?
Well, I started in 1975. So whatever that turns out to be.
That's 25, about right.
Yeah, so it's 20, yeah, 45 years.
When did you start creating more fine art style sketches, your weapon of choice, as you've shown us, micron pens and, watercolor blocks? When did you transcend architecture, or has that been going on the whole time?
Well, it really started with my teaching at Texas A&M. And actually I went there, the first 4 years of my tenure there was as the department head. And as the department head, I was required to travel to our study abroad programs to just check them out. And it was at this time I got to go to Italy and to Barcelona, and the Italian and Spanish landscapes are so beautiful, especially compared to many of the American landscapes. Um, I began to watercolor and sketch. Actually, I began sketching first, and then I bought one of those little watercolor sets. And in 2003, uh, I was giving papers at international papers, and again, I would take my drawings and my pens with me and do sketches of the local area. And in 2007, I traveled in Europe with my son David, and we went to Venice and Florence and Genoa and Nice and Aix-en-Provence and Paris and London. And through that sort of road trip, he was video filming, and then I was doing watercolors and sketches. So that's how it began. But it really didn't get serious until my first teaching post in Italy was in 2005. And that's the time that I did the Corvus drawing. Mm. And I was always, every time I went there, you go to Tuscany, you see the Tuscan landscape, and it's so compelling to draw or paint in whichever. So anyway, that was the beginning.
Cool. Well, yeah, the Tuscany, I mean, how could you not want to, immortalize it in some sort of way, right?
I went every other fall semester. So that was in 2005, 7, 9, 11, and 13 was my last semester there. So each time I brought my watercolor blocks and pens. And when you're teaching in an abroad program, a lot of the work is done during the week, and you have the weekends that are a little bit more free. So,
how many of those drawings from those semesters are in the show in Gainey Hall?
All of them.
That's the answer I wanted. We have 70 even
right.
pieces on the wall, which is pretty cool. So my last question is selfish because I'm trying to be a better journaler, writer. I feel like when you told me about your writing practice, it was really inspiring just to remember your life. I mean, at the very basic level, and then, inspire yourself to think bigger and, make more art. When did you start and how did you keep it up?
Well, I started in 1985. And in 1985, my family and I moved to England as I began my PhD program. And I asked myself at the beginning this question: how do I know I'm getting smarter? And I was assuming that by doing a PhD, you're going to get smarter. And I was wondering if the little gray cells in my head would actually evolve. And the answer I came up with is really difficult to figure out how you get smarter. It's like how does the fish know he's in water, or her? And so I thought, well, if I started journaling and putting down my ideas, that then I could see the evolution of my thinking, especially over about a 5-year period. So I bought my first journal and started journaling. And tell you the truth, the first 5 years of doing this journaling was not every day. It was basically I was either processing my PhD research, asking myself the questions of, well, what's next on the agenda here? What should I be studying? And then doing a lot of diagramming and drawing. And the second part was actually, processing emotional issues and other good issues with my family, because doing a PhD and raising a family in a foreign country is not easy. So that happened for the first 5 years. A friend of mine, Dr. D. Joy Coulter from Boulder, was a developmental psychologist, and she is an avid journaler as well. And she told me that I have to do it for at least 5 years in order to get the full benefit from the journaling process. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. And it just so happens that 5-year window was the time it took me to get my PhD. So by the time I got the PhD after 5 years, I was pretty entrenched in doing the journaling, which means that by that time, I had the discipline of doing it. And I think if anybody is interested in doing daily journals, which I began doing that next decade from about 1990 on, is to have a convenient place to put your journal and pens and all that kind of stuff out so that whenever you get called to write something down, it's already out and ready to go. And so today, even I have a wonderful, comfortable chair where I enjoy my coffee in the morning. And by the way, cheers. um, and so my journal is laid out there with a pen, and the ideas come. And I recall one of my bosses, who's a dean at Texas A&M, asked this question of me one day. He said, "Where do ideas come from?" And I thought about that. I said, "Well, that's a very interesting question, because it's something we don't think about, right? You just get an idea and then you promote it, or you deal with it, or you process it, or whatever you do. But where do they come from?" And for teaching beginning design students, this I thought was a very interesting question, because if we could help them understand where ideas come from, then maybe they could have better access to them. Well, I don't know if there's a real definitive answer to that question, but part of it is through your daily experiences, you begin to process stuff. And so deep inside of you, you begin to access at somewhere, either in your heart, your brain, or throughout your body, somewhere an idea comes in. And then you begin to work that idea. And eventually, as an architect, that idea becomes manifest in what I might be designing. So the idea of journaling was a good way to catch ideas. So when you get an idea, and I get lots of ideas waiting for stoplights, you're sitting there for about 30 seconds. What do? Wiggle your thumbs and think about this and that. And a lot of ideas come at those points. So you have to kind of remember that idea. Otherwise, it's very easy to lose the ideas. And as soon as I would get home, for example, I would then write the ideas down in my journal.
Well, I've seen your station in your house. It's pretty awesome. So I have one bonus question. Cheers.
Yeah.
Yay.